My name's Sophie TEDMANSON. I'm the Deputy Editor and Arts Editor of Vogue Australia. Welcome to our forum. Oh, that's a bit loud. So we have Reese Lee to my left, artist Reese Lee, and Anna and Luke from Romance Was Born, and ALISON KUBLER, curator and writer and all sorts of things ALISON is. And tonight's forum is, the title is the Fashion Forum, Cultural Trends, How Fashion and Art Have the Power to Predict Cultural Trends and Communicate a Moment in Time. So I guess we should start by asking the old debate about art versus fashion. Do you think, we'll just open it up with a big one. I'll start with you. What do you think about art versus fashion?
It's like the meaning of life. Art versus fashion. Wow. I don't know. I don't know if there's a verse. I don't know if it's like. I don't think it's verse fashion. I think both these things kind of, operate independently and also hold hands from time to time.
Do you think fashion is an art form? I guess that's one big question.
For sure. And probably increasingly so. It's high art now. And I was talking to Alison earlier, and she was saying how now you can see fashion in museums all over the world.
Okay. What about you guys?
Well, I think that it's close. I think that art and fashion, definitely two very separate things. And I think the major difference that I notice is fashion is like big business, I suppose. I mean, art is too, but fashion is more of a commercial venture, I think. And that's the major differentiation. And I think obviously people want to sell their art, but I think the pressure to sell fashion is a lot greater, and the seasonal nature of churning out collections and sell-through and things like that, it's a lot more of it's a much more commercial thing than art. I think that's the major differentiation.
I tend to agree with Luke, but I do think they do live in sort of the same world. They can live in the same world, but I guess coming from our perspective in fashion, there is a lot of people in the industry that are not. They should not be called artists, or they do not do art. So yeah, and I do agree that you can go to amazing institutions, see incredible fashion exhibitions that have full merit, and so I don't think there is a right or wrong answer, but I guess from where we're coming from, it's definitely a more artistic point of view and difference, and the whole seasonal thing, it's not what we kind of signed up for in the beginning. We were just making creative things, and so I don't know, there's no answer, I don't think.
Your clothes have always been extremely artistic, though. Tell me about the inspiration behind, how the label and the artistic inspiration behind it.
Well, from the beginning, our first ever collection, we collaborated with an artist, and almost every season now we collaborate, or we say collaborate, but we use an artist's work to kind of make our prints for our collection. And I feel like that's just kind of something that, I don't know, we did, and we just kind of kept doing it, and it wasn't a conscious decision. Like Anna was saying, nothing we've ever really done has been too much of a conscious decision, but it's just something that we've done, and it makes things more exciting for us, and it keeps us kind of enthusiastic, because as Anna said, the whole seasonal thing is, not really what we ever signed up for, so it keeps it exciting, and it kind of breaks up the monotony of just, churning shit out, and I think that that's a really strong part of our brand DNA, and it's kind of, I can't really imagine doing what we do without doing that.
How, just on that, for people that might not know, explain how closely you work with the artist when you're coming up with those prints, maybe with your latest collection?
We usually get free rein with the artist's work, and we kind of, when we start a collaboration, we kind of are very open about our approach, and that's kind of, we just need that, kind of, they need to be able to respect what we do, and we respect their art, but then, it gives us freedom to do what we want. But then before we go to print, like, we always talk to the artist and go, this is where we've come from with this, and da-da-da, like, to make sure that they're happy with it. But sometimes, like, it's more both ways. Like this show we did for Fashion Week, we worked with Linda Jackson, and you know, she's a fashion designer, but she's also an amazing textile designer and artist. And the whole concept of the show was getting back to our roots and like hand making and the artisan way of making fashion. And so Linda was really hands-on with us, so for the show, and I think it was a really refreshing approach. But generally we get free rein, and the artists are pretty open with that approach, which is amazing, and because it could be really, but I think we've been really lucky with who we've worked with in the past. They've always just, I don't know, had a sense of, confidence with what we're going to do with it maybe, or and are happy for their work to go on a new journey as well.
Do you try and pick artists who have a similar sort of aesthetic or mindset to you, or do you... Oh, sorry.
Or no, not really. We often are already friends with the artist, or we kind of have met them before, or we will like put them away and we're like, oh, when their kind of aesthetic suits the theme of the collection or what we're trying to do. And I think the thing that maybe people think about me and Anna when they say like, oh, you know, you guys are artists, well, we don't think we are, but I think maybe the thing that makes people think that is the approach that we take to the work. And when we start a collection, we're like trying to communicate a message or a story, or we have something that we want to say, or whether it's, you know, communicate a visual representation of a world we're trying to create, or I don't know, like there is kind of a story behind what we do. And I think like the reason we choose some artists sometimes is because they either have a, you know, similar story that their work also relates to what we're trying to say, or their aesthetic would help communicate visually like what we're trying to say with our collection. So we don't just choose an artist for any reason, and I mean for no reason. There's always a thought process behind it, and I think that also is the reason why when we do ask an artist, they kind of, once we explain to them what's going on and, you know, what we want to do with the work, I think that gives them a bit more, assures them a bit more that, you know, they would feel comfortable going ahead with what we would do.
Alison, I left you out before when we were asking about fashion versus art, and you've done a lot of you've done a lot of research and written a lot of essays about it. What's your view on fashion and art?
I think it's almost a redundant argument now, in a way, about fashion versus art. And I think that we were talking earlier about this collapse of high and low, and I think that's well and truly happened. But I think it's true what you say, Luke, that there is this commercial imperative to fashion that's very interesting, and it obviously drives it. It drives the making of what you're actually making. You know, there's this desire to make money at the end of the day. And yet, Reese, you'd probably agree too, that the art world has kind of escalated so much in the last 10 years that, I mean, we are actually in an art fair. This is not an art gallery. And this, and the prevalence of art fairs around the world and in Australia alone, I think would indicate how art has become well and truly an economy of its own making. But I think what's interesting about that even inside of that, even though we are sitting in this building where artworks are being sold for lots of money, much more than even couture, you know, people often talk about couture is so expensive, but in fact there are artworks out there that are $80,000, considerably more than, you know, some pieces of couture. I think what's interesting about it is that art always does aspire to a kind of longevity, that most artists, I think, want to endure on some level, which is not to say that fashion designers don't, but it's so quick, it's such a quick transition that I think it's very hard to hold on to those fashion moments. And it's probably why there's really only a handful of designers that we would say historically are the ones who have endured. Why someone like Yves Saint Laurent is such a legend, so legendary, there's a real longevity to what he made, in the same way that some artists have that longevity. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing. I think we need to think about, when we talk about fashion and art all the time as being the same thing or not the same thing, I think it does come down to money and a kind of a philosophical approach to why we're doing a thing. And I think what you guys do, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, you know, I've looked at your work for a long time, and it is fair to say that those pieces are very collectible now. So people want to own something that has the Del Catherine Barton on it, in the same way that someone will try and buy Yayoi Kusama Louis Vuitton, because there is a real cachet to that object as compared to other things out of fashion. So you have created this longevity, which is really important, I think. And you don't do huge runs either, do you? Yeah. So in a way, I think what you do is very artistic, because I mean, like, how many runs would you make of something like that, for example?
Well, it depends how many get ordered. If
Yeah.
10,000 get ordered, we
Yeah.
need 10,000.
But you're not like Zara-ing Zara Del Catherine Bartons.
No, and I think actually that's interesting that you would say, because this season when we showed our summer show at the Art Gallery of New South Wales,
which was beautiful, by the way.
thank you. We showed in the morning at 9 a.m. and we only showed 20 looks, and they were all handmade and they were all one-off dresses, and we really were concentrating on making an effort to slow down. And I think there's so much fast fashion around at the moment, and especially in Australia has just kind of experienced the opening of like all those big chains for the first time. And not only just that, fashion just in general is like so incredibly fast, and you go to shows and they're over so quickly, and we wanted to really slow it down and give it time for people to appreciate the work that went into it. And even though it was only 20 looks, I don't think it felt like it was lacking anything. I was worried that it would, but I think that
it was much more like a performance, really, wasn't it? In terms of what you did, I saw so many images of it, which was, I think, when you compare that to some fashion shows, you might see looks, but what you created was this tableau that was like a performance. And to me, that was very artistic and theatrical, and I thought that was a very interesting approach to making.
That was also like the infamous STC show, the famous STC show that you did a few years ago.
Doilies and Pearls.
Yeah.
The old ladies living under the sea, having a tea party under the sea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think that creating that environment and, you know, I think that helps communicate the message, and it really, you know, explains what me and Anna are on about, and I think it gives, you know, there's no better way to sell what we do than by doing that kind of a show. And I think, you know, the publicity that generated and what it's done for us, and it really launched our career, just that one, you know, 20 minutes. And I think that's, ever since that was a success, it's just pushed us to want to keep on doing that. And the mood will change, or we'll do a night show, or I don't know, but this one was, we just wanted to make something beautiful, and there was no real like story this time other than we're working with Linda Jackson and kind of celebrating our mutual love of, you know, Australiana and our whatever, and we just wanted to do something beautiful and slow. And anyway, we wanted to show in that room in the gallery for ages, and I don't know, it just was like, it was meant to be nothing more than just like something beautiful. So I think that's...
Maybe it's that show experience, that immersive space in that moment in time that it can be seen outside of fashion. Like for us, we're creating like this fantasy world, and it's like an immersive transportation. And I think that's what art does, is when you look at it, it's like takes you somewhere else, and it's reflecting someone else's take on a reality or a fantasy. And I feel like that's the one chance where we can be artists, I guess, with our shows. It's like this feeling of, very experiential.
An hour after that show, it's all hanging on a rack, and someone's just pulling it apart and whinging about this and that, and it turns into something completely different.
What about you, Reese, from an artist's perspective? Would you agree that it's creating a fantasy from the art side of things?
For sure. I live in a complete fantasy world.
Have you ever been to a fashion show?
I have not. No. But yeah, definitely it's full on fantasy every day of my life.
I've known Reese for a long time. It's kind of true, I think.
Yeah.
And you've just, you've collaborated. We're talking, we had the fashion side of things. You've done a collaboration with Gorman. How did that come about? Tell us about that.
Lisa was a really strong ambassador of my work early on. Around 2000, she started, we started hanging out, we were friends, and the friendship grew and her collection of her work kind of grew. And a few years later, she wanted to do a collaboration, and I wasn't that kind of into it. So it didn't happen. And then I think we did it a couple of years ago. I just called her up out of the blue and said, "Do you want to do some stuff together?" And I spent a couple of hours one afternoon just doing some drawings, and probably just emailed them to her, and next thing you know, we have a whole range. So
Was it good for your career, Reese? Did you feel like it lent something to what you do? Because I think that's always the tension between art and fashion, is about it has to have a meaningful, it has to be authentic on some level.
Yeah.
Does it feel authentic? And personally, I thought it was when I looked at the Gorman work. I thought it was very you and very them.
Sure.
And because sometimes you can tell with brands where you just think that this looks terrible. I won't name names. but they're like big fashion houses, really big ones, who have the money and they can just say to an artist, "Come and work with us," and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Oh, I mean, it felt right for me, and it was just a bit of fun, really, between two friends. It was just a bit of dialogue, and it was seamless. It was so easy, with no tension, and it just happened. Which, I mean, that's kind of how I wanted to go, so it worked out. Yeah.
The thing that you were talking about that's really interesting, that speed of fashion, that maybe it's 6 cycles in a year now, where it used to be 2. And artists have their own cycle, that goes around the solo shows they're having, the group shows, the art fairs, etc. It's really hard to sustain. I don't know how fashion designers do it, because then you put on this incredible show at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, but it becomes sound bites that you see on Instagram. And yet for artists, the thing is still always, the aspiration is still a monograph. Like artists still love paper, books, beautiful illustrations. I mean, there isn't an artist who doesn't want a monograph, am I right, Reese?
Sure.
And in a way, it's like anathema to what we think where the world is going, that the world will all be digital and it will just be on imagery. But the lure of paper and really beautiful images is so great. And I think we're talking about Instagram and how it's so easy and so quick, and we're looking at images all the time, and you'll see things from a designer and sometimes you get them confused in your head, and I just think it's quite a challenge for designers to keep up with that, and artists too, probably.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I often find myself painting from my phone.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I feel kind of naked if I haven't got my phone in my hand and painting. It's quite weird.
Yeah. And how do you two find that speed of imagery? It's so fast now. So you've put all this energy into this beautiful show at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. That was photographed a lot, and you have obviously great images. Do you keep a really great archive of that, with the idea that it's a record of a performance? Because you should, if you don't.
Yeah.
That's the bit I was going to say.
Do.
I actually checked Instagram halfway through our show, and
So see how you're trending.
I wanted to see what it looked like, and I knew it would be on Instagram already, and because the show was slow, I checked out. And I reassured
At least he's
myself.
honest. It's good. And you got a lot of likes. I know, because I wasn't even there, and everyone was looking at it. So.
It wasn't until we saw the photos that we realised what had happened. Well, okay, because we were just so deep in the making, and like just happened so quickly. And then we saw the images, and it was just such relief, and this satisfaction, and we're like, okay, we've totally done it. Like that was exactly what we wanted to happen.
I remember when we did the doily show you were talking about earlier in 2009, and I don't think I had an iPhone then, and that after the show, everyone was saying that was great, blah, 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 and people were crying and whatever. We're like, oh, yeah, cool. But then it wasn't until that weekend, and it was like on the cover of the paper, it was everywhere, and we still haven't had that much press from anything. Anyway, I was like, whoa, this was like a thing. This is awesome. And then after our show this year, I kind of felt the same way, but I went home and I did some laundry or something, and then I was laying on my bed reading Instagram, looking at Instagram, and it was just all there, and everyone was like saying how cool it was, and you know, they loved it, it was beautiful, blah, blah. Anyway, I just knew straight away that it was good that day, and I didn't have to wait till the weekend. And I mean, I'm lucky because it doesn't even really make it to the paper anymore so much as it used to, and it was awesome. And anyway, I just think Instagram, well, that made me feel, I liked what you were saying. What do you I liked how instant it was.
So immediate,
Yeah,
and it's so.
that was good and I think it was also cool that my friends who couldn't go, they'd already seen it as well.
Yeah.
And so when we all
Before it's over.
met up that night, like everyone had kind of, you know, theoretically seen it or knew what had happened. And yeah, I remember we had to wait like 2 weeks to get a video of the doily show, and like everyone was already, you know, bits and pieces. And anyway, I think.
But the thing that's sort of interesting about that is that, like a lot of art performances, you know, the really old ones, the original Marina Abramoviches, right? You had to be there, the original ones, or you had to see it in photography. And there's something kind of apocryphal and amazing about those things, because you just sort of know about them, you know about their existence, but you never really saw it, which is an extraordinary thing. Like, we do live in a very different world now. So, I mean, for the longest time, if you're an artist in Australia or an art historian, you only knew things through reproduction. And I actually think, ironically, we're sort of back at that phase now. We're back at this stage where we are seeing things through reproduction. We feel like we intimately know it, but of course we don't, because it's happening on the other side of the world. But it's so immediate that we might as well be back in, you know, 1989 studying art history at UQ, where you were looking at, you know, things and thinking, oh, that's really amazing, but you're seeing it in a book, which was the Australian condition.
On the flip side, though, do you think you were saying with your show, you know, you chose 20 looks and you wanted to kind of slow it down? And this is also a question for art and art-wise. In galleries, you know, you walk around and you see people just immediately wanting to Instagram something and then walking off. They don't kind of tend to take in the moment. And you know, there is something. And I've done it. I've sat in a fashion show and immediately taken a photo and then looked, and then it's like, oh, hang on, I actually want to appreciate. I have to physically put my phone down and watch the thing, or the same with art. Do you find it hard these days, or is it a shame these days, I guess, that the flip side of that, the positive side of the immediacy of it all, is that there also is, maybe people aren't appreciating things as much? Or is it that they're just going back and looking at it later? And that's a question.
I think their appreciation is still the same, but because of that technology is there, they just, I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. I mean, I live in the country, so I rarely get to see shows. So, you know, I check them out online, and
You
I
check it out
feel like I've seen them. You know?
Yeah. But the weird thing that is, and we talked about this briefly, is that what it means is that people are a bit sloppy with their intellectual property now, so they can, because there's so much imagery in the world, it's very easy to take an image and not know where it's from. And I think it's happening a lot more. Like I often, you know, we have children. I talk to them even now. She's only 10. I'm like, you have to respect intellectual property. Because I think it's a big thing. It's that I, you know, do some sessional lecturing with fashion students, not as a designer. I mean, I'm the one saying to them, be cognizant, do your fashion history, have a knowledge, because it's not good enough to be able to say, oh, I was a little bit influenced. It's like, that's just bad. You know, you need to have, and I think with artists it happens a lot, that it's so easy now with social media to let intellectual property go.
Sure.
And I find that really interesting. I think we're at a really interesting time in contemporary culture, particularly in contemporary art, but I think in fashion too, where, you know, we talk about postmodernism and this thing where the image is paramount, you know, but ideas are paramount too. We've sort of forgotten that an idea is actually the thing, because we see it so quickly. You know, who doesn't do that with their feet? Or is that just me? I do that really quickly, and I know that I'm doing it. But most of the time, you know, I'm looking to see who it, like I will never just put it up and just repost it. Like I'll think about who the person was and try and tag them in it. And I was thinking, you can't do that, and you probably shouldn't put it up, you know. But it happens a lot. I'm sure you guys have had your work ripped off, right?
Yes,
anyone you want to sue?
I think there are people who go on about, oh, that person ripped off my thing, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm just like, well, are you that starved for ideas that you need to go on about it? Just move on and be the bigger person.
It kind of goes back to the, you know, the topic, cultural trends, how fashion and art have the power to predict cultural trends. I find that an interesting question because, you know, like last year we saw the result of the Spring Summer 2014 shows. There was so much art that just came out of those shows overseas, and all the we had a whole whole art issue devoted to it, which talked about Chanel created a whole gallery for their show, and that was obviously art was influencing fashion that way. So I guess can art and going back to the question, do they have the power to predict cultural trends? I mean, everything seems to be cyclical, so.
I don't think they can predict. No one can really do that. So, I think it kind of feels like that sometimes when people try and be original and they do really interesting things and they really push things in a certain direction. And people kind of latch onto that, and sometimes that kind of can feel like it's a prediction, and that filters through into fashion and other art and TV and all different sorts of things. So I don't think anyone has the power to predict, really.
I think it's that that really old fashion history idea of the trickle up and trickle down theory, that the street will influence couture and vice versa. But we were talking before about the trend. It'd be interesting to see what the audience thinks. But I think there is a trend in contemporary art right now for bad ceramics, in the way that there was a trend. See, people are laughing. There was a trend for bad painting. Naive painting. It's kind of like an outsider art that's become a look. And I think that that's really prevalent in Australian ceramics. I think if you go to and look at a lot of stalls, you're going to see a lot of bad ceramics. But when I'm using that term bad, it's like a deliberate ugly that I think is really interesting. And I was saying to Reese, what do you think about that? And you did agree with me, didn't you?
Well, I don't know how deliberate it is. I think people just want to do it,
But why? Why
because
now?
their friend's doing it and they've seen it somewhere and they want to
don't
make
you
something.
think you're seeing a lot of it? Like, I honestly feel like I'm seeing a lot of that.
There's a lot of it.
It's a real trend.
Yeah, it's definitely a trend.
And the other trend, I'm just going to say it, is collage. It's a big one. There's a lot of collage. And then we were sitting there, and on the way down, I looked at Instagram, and Riccardo Tisci has the new Givenchy ad is a collage. And I just thought, wow, so there's the moment right there. Like, I'd seen all these artists like Karen Holloman, really great artists who I follow on Instagram, whose work I love. Suddenly, it's in a fashion ad. And I thought, how fascinating. This moment has actually it's a total collapse of these two worlds. Now, I haven't looked into that campaign, so it's fair to say maybe Givenchy has gone to this artist and said, make us a body, make us this work. But maybe not either. Maybe it's just that thing where, again, oh, wow, that's a really good idea. Let's take that, just kind of interesting. But I think that's a trend.
Chanel have done that with their perfume bottles at the moment. If you check the Instagram, they've done all the star signs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Pam have been doing it for years.
Yeah,
They got it from somewhere.
Well, I am interested in getting into ceramics.
It
probably is in fashion.
So, okay.
It does. Oh, sorry.
No, go on. It's not a very important question. I just want to know the ceramic thing. Well, you are not. No, I just find it really interesting. Like, I guarantee you're all going to walk out tonight and go and have a look, and there'll be a lot of ceramics, and you will think about it. You obviously have an artistic background yourself, so you're always making things outside of fashion. Is that part of that? Is that just feeding that thing, or you just want to keep doing it?
Well, when I was a child, I remember being in the women's wear department of David Jones and touching all the fabrics, and I touch on that. I'm killing myself.
You should touch it to his beard.
Yeah, exactly. Staple it down. There we go. And I find I don't know. There's something about the tactile nature of fabric, and when we make things or whatever, as gay as it sounds, I love watching the skirts move, and I love working with fabric. And then lately, I don't know, I've noticed that when I touch ceramics or something that's handmade ceramic, I just love the feeling of it, and I love using my hands, obviously. And I'm sad to say that what me and Anna do these days, we don't use our hands that much anymore, as much as we'd like to.
Yeah.
And I just feel like it's something that I could see myself getting into and being able to get a handle on. That's not, that's the thing about it. Anyone can really do it. And I'm also very keen on the idea of being able to give it away as a gift.
That's cool.
I don't know, something that someone's made with their hands, you would never throw it away.
But you see, this is where I think you hit the nail on the head, because we're talking about a cultural trend. And I think artists have known this forever, that making things by your hand, with your hand, like Reese does, you know, is really great. And we have sort of forgotten that, the hand in things. And I think it's why we value haute couture and why we value certain fashion over other fashion, because we understand that it is handmade, that there's a real handmade quotient to that. I mean, sure, I think you probably find that with your own work, right? That the more intricate it is, the more extraordinary it is, you know, and people do respond to that authentic gesture, I think. I think that's part of the ceramic thing. I think that's why the bad ceramic thing is happening. I think it's a good thing. You should do your ceramics.
I really hope, though, that this whole Instagram, social media madness, like, I just think about kids, though, and like the next generation, and how they're going to be so out of touch of just being able to find peace in just making something, like being a kid and like just on your iPhone in the back of the car and like, well, like, for us, like, we grew up in regional Australia. We're all about our imagination and being alone and just, creating these stories in our mind, and had no technology, you know, like, cool.
No distraction.
Yeah, and just simple, and, you know, driving along, you make pictures in the sky with the clouds, and just kids, like, are they going to be able to have that abstract, or that, like, that
you're going to be bored to be
space or
creative.
something?
Yeah,
No.
I think that's a
I
big
mean, they're
thing.
going to rule on a computer and probably be, amazing engineers. I don't know, like, is that going to be are we not going to have this freedom of...
Oh, I definitely think that. I mean, I think it's such a fine line. I know, sorry, it's boring to talk about being a mother, but it's true. Like, I think there's that thing where they need to be bored to be creative, to find some, you know, quiet time to do something. Hello, colouring books are the biggest thing in the world.
I know, I was just going to
Because
say
that's what
that.
that's
They're the
about.
new thing, yeah.
It's about people who are frustrated and want to be creative. Hands up if you've done a colouring in. Someone has. Look, see? It's the thing.
I've got
That's a
4 on
trend.
my desk.
That's a trend right there.
Yeah.
I think maybe the ceramics trend is a trend because, you know, everything is so... There's mass, you know, there's...
Mass produced, yeah.
And just like this getting back to roots, and I think...
And the one-offness of it is beautiful, yeah.
And
I mean, I would do tapestry or like make a rug or something if I could, but that's just a whole whatever. It's just, you know, I think the thing about ceramics is it's just there.
It's immediate and you can do it.
Yeah. And I also know that like my trendy friends who aren't so artistically minded, they have a lot of colouring and books in their houses in the mountains. And that's something that I've noticed.
See, love it.
We talked earlier about the huge foundation, the fondations that have been done out of the big fashion conglomerates. Oh, sorry, God, I keep forgetting it's there. Overseas, and so it's sort of just going back to the fashion and art connection. There seems to be I guess, a trend of you know, fashion conglomerates taking on making their own museums, and you know, someone might think the Louis Vuitton Fondation in Paris will be full of, you know, historical, amazing clothes, but it's actually full of incredible artworks. Do you think that that's kind of a new way forward for, well, I mean, it is, I guess, happening, but what do you think of that and the fact that these big houses are creating, you know, galleries that are kind of up against, you know, the Guggenheims and things of housing incredible artworks? I guess, what do you think of that as an artist?
I don't know, I haven't really thought about it, but I mean, if people want to make these elaborate kind of museums and house lots of art, then I'm all for it. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, fair enough.
I think again, like Prada, for example, well, yeah, so you should, and Louis Vuitton, so you should. Like you know, it'd be kind of, I think so, yeah, so you should.
Yeah, I think that's, it's true. I mean, they are the new philanthropists. They're the new Medicis because they can afford to, you know. And fortunately, they've got the nous, because not every brand does it. It's only a handful that I think make really interesting contributions to contemporary art via institutions. I mean, Trussardi, I think, is probably the most interesting to me in a way, because they don't have a purpose-built museum. It's not like this massive edifice which is about Louis Vuitton or Prada. They do temporary installations, temporary performances and things. And their director is one of the biggest curators in the world, curated the Venice Biennale. So there's an absolute commitment to art and intellect and ideas without this need to build a collection. And they actually sort of say that. It's not really about this collection. It's just about saying to an artist, do whatever you want to do, which is kind of fantastic. And the sad reality is public money is drying up. It just is. And you know, in Sydney alone, the Art Gallery of New South Wales is trying to find money to build an institution. It's kind of an interesting point that we're at, because there's this new currency and a new economic might in fashion that just doesn't exist in other realms.
But for them, I wonder if it is about, like, number one, money, because I think that they're doing it probably, I don't think that's the main drive for it. I think it's probably more
Altruistic.
Look at us, and like, and like, they can do it. But like, on another level, like, Karl Lagerfeld has his own bookstore in Paris, like, because
Great
he's,
stuff.
I mean, he's so into books, and like, I mean, how wonderful, like, he's just, like, why not, that's his passion, and he can have this one place where he can tap into the most, you know, insane.
Interesting things.
Yeah.
And you know, Miuccia Prada has always said, what I make is not art. And they've never really collaborated. They did one collaboration, Prada. She doesn't believe in that. She thinks that that's, actually she said, I don't think I require art to make what we do better, which I thought was really great. But also saying that, you know, it's not something that she needed to do per se. But their foundations are incredible. The art that you see there really would rival, because they don't have to jump through bureaucratic hoops. They can just kind of buy what they want to buy, which would be amazing. You know, such an amazing thing
She
to
works
do.
in communities and does artisan work in different
Yeah, that's right.
projects.
Yeah, so it's a
So
different
that's-
kind of art. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, I can't really see. It's really dark in there, just while we're still talking. Is there any questions? Yeah.
Just in regards to art and fashion, like 20 years ago as a musician, you literally had to be discovered to be taken into a studio to produce a record, and then the company puts it out there. With art 20 years ago, it was the same, but with digital technology these days, everybody has a professional studio in their bedroom. For instance, as an artist, everybody has a digital fabric printing station or a printing sublimation printing set up at home where they can literally print their own creations onto a shirt or onto a skirt or onto whatever. I think that's the way the world is. It's the world of turning things over extremely fast, and I think that because of that digital technology and because of the collision between fashion and art, it makes it much, much easier for an unknown artist to become literally an overnight success because of the access to all of the digital technologies and the printing technologies that we can now buy within our own home. Do you think as a panel that that is a good thing, or do you think that it's kind of, I guess, watering down the real talent of artists today?
I think two things about that. I read a really interesting article in the New York Times about Instagram and art on Instagram, and it was extremely interesting. Like, two big dealers who were talking about their artists appearing on Instagram and then other people's Instagram, and it was driving sales through their gallery. So I think that is really that is a new realm. That's one of the good things about Instagram. But the other thing that I think is interesting about that is that we do, as a culture, aspire to the new and the fast. It's what we do. So we're always looking for the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And we forget that, you know, famous artists like Jackson Pollock or Sidney Nolan, even Linda Jackson, you know, they're around for a long time, making things for a long time. And I think that there is something to be said for spending a lot of time being good at what you're doing. Anyone can be famous and make things really quickly and become famous overnight. But I would like to think that it takes longer to do that. I guess, yeah, I think it's nice. There have been artists who, you know, in the old days, you weren't famous till you're in your 50s. And now it's so quick. It's such a quick thing, you know.
I think it's problematic, and I read an article of Grace Jones the other day, and she said how artists these days can reach their goals sooner, and it doesn't give them enough time to actually formulate what exactly it is they're trying to communicate or what they want in the long run. And I think me and Anna have been doing what we do for 10 years, and it's only really the last 2 years that we kind of have started to understand what it is we actually want to do.
Yeah.
Before that, we were just kind of like, you know, having a lull
Experimenting.
and just like, you know, seeing what we could do without any kind of clear vision or, you know, an end goal. And so I think, you know, maybe the thing that is dangerous about that is, that idea of, you know, not really knowing exactly what it is you're trying to do for yourself. And I mean, now, the thing with technology is if I just Google romance was born in general, the stuff that comes up, 80% of it, I'm like, oh. And then, do you know what I mean? Like that's there forever then. So I feel like in a way it does yourself justice to not try to reach your goal so soon because, you should...
Make authentic comes back to the
authenticity.
And be proud of what you put out.
Because I think, ostensibly everyone wants to endure. Reese, you want to endure, don't you? You want people
I
to
want to
want
endure.
your work.
I mean,
50 years from now.
I don't find that an issue though, because if it's good, it's good, and if it's good, it's going to have longevity. If it's average, it's going to fall off.
Maybe that's the tension right there, because I think we're less capable of ascertaining what is good and what is bad. And of course, that's always in the eye of the beholder. But I think it's an interesting thing because we don't really, what happens with all that social media is there is no real dialogue. There's no forum for discussion other than things like this, where people sit and talk about stuff. But where else does it happen? It happens in art journals.
It does.
And in the pages of Vogue. But that's a small number of people maybe thinking and talking about those ideas. So I do often think about that. I think it's easy to become famous really quickly, but maybe it's to your detriment.
Is there any other questions?
Can I just say something that basically it's still an artistic process, but suddenly the process is public domain, which is actually a reflection of what's going on. That our lives are actually like in Facebook and Instagram, that everything, the idea of privacy and your process and as vetting, what you want to put out there, and that gets lost. So your process is still your process. It's just becoming a public domain.
Yes, that's an interesting point.
So do you mean the surprise is being taken away at the end, or?
No, it's sort of like that people are privy to your creative journey.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether it's a bad thing or a good thing.
It's interesting that I don't know if any of you saw the film Dior and I about Raf Simons and the behind him creating that incredible show, and that just and also the collaboration he did with Sterling Ruby and the flower wall and all that kind of stuff, which is now just infiltrated through. I mean, flowers are everywhere, but that kind of thing, that unveiling of the behind the scenes was extraordinary. And people, who I talk to who aren't interested in fashion are just like, that film was beautiful, and that kind of the behind the scenes stuff, which goes back to the immediacy of Instagram as well. Was it? Do you guys agree? Oh.
You've studied fashion throughout the ages. So, say during Impressionism, say with Monet, did clothes and colours that they used, or did they lighten, did they change because people were seeing things differently?
Yeah, most definitely. I think.
So that would be art was influencing.
Yeah. I mean, there's such a body of study and writing around fashion in art because it is so. I mean, we sort of forget about this. It's this entire realm when we talk about fashion and art. We forget about all of that. But of course, the iconography and of fashion that appears, like you're talking about Monet. But think about Manet's Olympia, which is such an incredibly important work. This famous prostitute and the rose on her neck, etc. Think about Renaissance painting or the Tudors, and the way fashion works in that imagery is so important historically and socially, and it's something that we don't even really talk about now because what's interesting about that is people don't really paint like that anymore. It's less possible to look at a work and say, well, that's from 2015. It's less, we're less able to do that. But I personally find that really wonderful because it's this very didactic way of painting. We can look at something and understand everything about that individual by virtue of what they're wearing, which is what, fashion is kind of about on some level. It's very confusing, isn't it? It's a very confusing realm. Things used to be incredibly straightforward.
I think from the 60s, 70s, 80s, from the 80s when we were born, I could clearly see those decades, but I mean the noughties, I guess,
It's harder.
And then, now, I don't know, it's just sort of, things just seem to be repeating itself.
Everything's sort of at the same time. But I had the privilege of working on a show in Adelaide last year called Fashion Icons, and it was so incredible from the Musée Les Arts Décoratifs, and it started with Dior's new look and went through to 2014. And that was such an extraordinary show because you saw these decades where it was quite clear and you could say, well, that's 1960s. And then there'd be this one anomalous thing within that decade where you'd think, God, that's extraordinary. It's like this timeless thing. But what gives the game away is the fabric. And you know, you're starting to look at, well, they were using that fabric because that fabric came in 1962 or whatever. And so that's really wonderful. It's that great story of, I guess, and you see that in art because, you know, we forget that artists didn't always use acrylic, and artists are using oil now. Oil is very popular, has come back in, and you have artists, you have companies in Melbourne that are creating their own oil paints that are made in Australia, and that will have cultural relevance. And that's about a return to the hand as well, because, you know, anyone can buy oil paint. You can buy it in a store, and it's the same oil paint that's available all around the world. But Australian artists are actually wanting oil paint from this Melbourne supplier because it's made in small batches, and that's really fantastic as well. It's like it's sort of like fashion returning to artisanship and wanting, you know, the lace makers and the bead makers. It's the same idea.
Anyone else got any questions? No? Is there anything else that we haven't touched on yet? I think you were talking about the exhibition you did in Adelaide. That just reminded me of what we mentioned earlier, that fashion exhibitions are becoming hugely popular in museums and galleries. We just had the Jean-Paul Gaultier exhibition in Melbourne, and at the moment there's Colette Dinnigan retrospective of the Powerhouse. They seem to be, becoming sort of part of an art. They seem to be becoming more popular anyway. Do you guys agree? Did you go and see any of those?
I didn't. I don't see anything.
I love how I keep asking you the question.
Yeah, I know. I got no answers. No, I just stay at home and paint pictures.
And he's got to paint, he's got to make and
Don't you want to see the David Bowie exhibition?
No.
It's amazing.
I'm going
He's got
next
some
week.
good songs.
It's really
But that is really interesting because, you know, a lot of people saw Valentino at Goma, and Goma doesn't have a fashion department. And, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would not have seen a show like that in an institution like that, because that would sort of be really intellectually not done. Why would you do that, you know? But what we recognise is that fashion draws huge audiences, and Savage Beauty has just closed in London and killed, like even beat the figures in New York because it was so well attended, you know, and it's absolutely that institutions, for institutions, people equate to money. It's free to go, but people equate to money, and that's why you see more and more fashion shows. I mean, last year there were 4 in Australia on at the same time. That just is amazing. But it's exactly the same as you would.
Last year we did one at the NGV.
That's right, which was fantastic, by the way.
And it was on the same time as Gaultier. So they had 2 fashion exhibitions on
Amazing.
at the same time.
Yours is better.
I think the V&A, the Savage Beauty, was the biggest, the most popular exhibition.
Of all,
V&A.
yeah, it was. Amazing.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's such a moment in time. It's like a perfect storm, you know, have this famous, incredible individual who dies and this body of work that is collected. It's really extraordinary. It's like everything, all the planets align. But what's amazing about that, and Valentino too, you know, you had people turning up to see that show, really lovely old ladies and young people, and everything in the Valentino show was couture, so it had all been made by hand. And I do remember thinking, this is amazing, like absolutely amazing, because we have got so removed from that, you know, the fastness of just life in general. And it was really great to see people marvelling at that. But the thing that we forget about that when we see it, you know, I do remember when you would go to see contemporary art galleries, and Indigenous art was not in contemporary art galleries, it was in museums. You know, so Indigenous work was in museums and not in galleries. So it's the same cultural shift. It's just there is a greater regard for fashion culturally and Indigenous practice as well. I mean, we see it, there's lots in this fair as well. But, you know, we forget that 20 years ago you wouldn't have seen that. It's nothing now to walk into the Art Gallery of New South Wales and see lots and lots of Indigenous work, because we expect that. Yeah.
Have you been around the art fair? I just wanted to bring you back to the art fair now. Have you had a look around? What did you think?
We only just got here. So I'm looking at it after this.
Well, if there's no more questions, then I think that probably wraps up the talk.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming.